You meet someone and, almost instantly, something shifts inside you. Not excitement exactly. Not desire in the usual sense. It feels more like responsibility. You notice their sadness before they mention it. You sense their instability before they explain it. And without consciously deciding to, you begin adjusting yourself around them, listening more carefully, offering reassurance, softening your needs, trying to make them feel okay. You might even tell yourself you're just empathetic. That you're caring. That you simply attract people who need support. But if you're honest, this pattern keeps repeating. You feel most drawn to people who are struggling, wounded, emotionally unavailable, or chaotic. People who need guidance. People who need patience. People who need fixing. And somehow, the more unstable they are, the stronger the pull feels. At the beginning, it can feel like chemistry. Like fate. Like a deep, unspoken bond. You feel needed. Seen. Important. Your presence seems to matter in a way that feels intense and meaningful. But over time, the dynamic starts to drain you. You give more than you receive. You listen more than you're heard. You regulate their emotions while ignoring your own. And slowly, quietly, you begin to disappear inside the relationship. What makes this so confusing is that your mind often sees the red flags clearly. You can name the problems. You can recognize the imbalance. You might even warn yourself early on. And yet, your body keeps moving closer. You feel compelled to stay. To try harder. To help them heal. To be the one who finally makes things work. This isn't weakness. And it isn't coincidence. There is a psychological pattern here, one that hides beneath attraction, empathy, and the desire to love deeply. A pattern where caretaking gets mistaken for intimacy. Where emotional labor feels like connection. Where instability feels familiar enough to be mistaken for passion. You're not drawn to these people because they're right for you. You're drawn to them because they activate something unfinished inside you. Something old. Something deeply wired. Something that learned, long before adulthood, that love comes with responsibility, and that closeness must be earned through effort. That's the contradiction at the heart of this pattern. You long for mutual, nourishing connection, yet feel magnetized toward relationships that require you to overfunction. You crave safety, yet feel most alive in emotional turbulence. You want to be loved, yet choose situations where love must be proven through sacrifice. And until this pattern is named, it keeps masquerading as attraction. The question isn't why your mind keeps choosing these people. The real question is why your nervous system recognizes them as home, even when home was never truly safe. Your attraction doesn't begin in your thoughts. It begins in your nervous system. Long before your mind decides whether someone is good for you, your body has already made a quiet assessment. It's already asking a question you're rarely aware of: do I recognize this emotional environment? Modern neuroscience offers an unsettling answer to why familiarity often masquerades as attraction. According to predictive coding theory, proposed by neuroscientist Carl Friston, the brain is not primarily designed to seek happiness, pleasure, or even safety. It is designed to minimize surprise. To predict what comes next. Your nervous system would rather choose a painful pattern it understands than a healthy pattern it cannot yet predict. This is why certain people feel instantly magnetic, not because they are good for you, but because they match a known emotional rhythm. Their instability, their sadness, their chaos, their need, it all feels strangely legible. Your body knows what to do here. How to respond. How to stay alert. How to caretake. This is not romance. It's recognition. When you meet someone who is emotionally dysregulated, inconsistent, or wounded in familiar ways, your nervous system lights up, not with bonding, but with activation. Your heart races. Your attention sharpens. You feel needed, important, essential. And your body mistakes this heightened state for chemistry. But what you're experiencing isn't connection. It's preparedness. Attachment research supports this. Psychologist Mary Ainsworth showed that early relational experiences create internal working models, templates for how love, safety, and connection operate. These templates live below conscious thought. They shape who feels attractive, who feels distant, and who feels right. If love once required vigilance, attunement, or emotional labor, your nervous system learned that closeness comes with responsibility. So when you meet someone who unconsciously recreates that demand, your system responds as if it's found home. This is why calm, emotionally available people can feel boring or unfamiliar at first. There's no puzzle to solve. No emotional fire to manage. No role to step into. Your nervous system doesn't know how to organize itself there yet. Stan Tatkin, a clinician known for integrating neuroscience with attachment theory, explains that attraction is often driven by nervous system compatibility, not emotional health. Two dysregulated systems can lock into a powerful dance, intense, consuming, and deeply familiar, while still being fundamentally unsafe. The chaos feels alive. The stability feels empty. Not because stability lacks depth, but because your body hasn't learned how to rest there. There's another layer to this: predictable stress. If your early environment was emotionally volatile, your nervous system adapted by staying alert. It learned that closeness requires monitoring. That love demands effort. That safety depends on how well you read the room. Over time, stress became predictable, and predictability became safety. So when you encounter someone whose emotional world feels unstable, your body doesn't recoil. It leans in. Because unpredictability feels known. Familiar. Manageable. You've survived it before. This is why you can intellectually recognize red flags while still feeling pulled closer. Your mind sees danger. Your body sees opportunity, an opportunity to do what it learned to do best. Caretake. Regulate. Stabilize. Fix. And underneath it all is a quiet hope your nervous system hasn't let go of: maybe this time, if I do it well enough, it will end differently. That hope isn't naive. It's biological. Your nervous system isn't chasing pain. It's chasing resolution. It's drawn toward the same emotional terrain because it believes, unconsciously, that repetition might finally bring completion. But repetition without awareness doesn't heal. It reinforces. And this brings us to the deeper question that begins to surface once the biology is understood: if your attraction is shaped by familiarity, where did that familiarity come from? Long before you were drawn to people who needed saving, you were learning a lesson about love that had nothing to do with romance. You were learning it quietly, relationally, without words. You learned it by watching moods shift. By sensing tension before it was spoken. By realizing, often very early, that someone else's emotional state mattered more than your own. This is how fixers are made. Not through trauma in the dramatic sense, but through emotional responsibility that arrived too early. A parent who was overwhelmed. A caregiver whose moods you learned to manage. A household where harmony depended on your ability to stay calm, helpful, or mature. You didn't choose this role. You adapted into it. As a child, you learned that love wasn't something you simply received. It was something you maintained. Something you earned by being attentive, by being useful, by being emotionally intelligent beyond your years. You learned how to read the room before you learned how to read yourself. Over time, this shaped a core belief: connection requires effort. Not mutual effort, but your effort. Donald Winnicott described something called the false self, not as a lie, but as an intelligent adaptation. The false self emerges when a child learns that being fully authentic threatens connection. So instead, the child becomes what the environment needs. Supportive. Easy. Low maintenance. Strong. Helpful. This is where the fixer identity begins, not as a desire to control others, but as a strategy to stay connected. You became hyper-attuned. You noticed emotional shifts others missed. You learned to soothe, anticipate, adjust. These skills likely earned you praise. You're so mature. You're so understanding. You're so empathetic. But beneath that praise was a quiet cost. No one was tracking you with the same care. So you internalized another belief: my needs are secondary. And that belief didn't disappear when you grew up. It evolved. In adulthood, it shows up as attraction. You feel drawn to people who are emotionally complex, wounded, unstable, or deep. Not because you enjoy suffering, but because your nervous system recognizes the role immediately. I know how to be here. I know how to help. I know how to earn closeness in this dynamic. This isn't conscious. It's procedural memory. Emotional muscle memory. You may even feel uncomfortable with people who are emotionally steady. People who don't need you to regulate them. People who meet you with consistency. They feel unfamiliar. Boring. Flat. Not because they lack depth, but because they don't activate the identity you built to survive. The fixer role once kept you safe. It preserved attachment. It minimized conflict. It made you valuable. But what worked in childhood becomes costly in adulthood. Because now, the same pattern asks you to abandon yourself in relationships. To overfunction. To explain away behavior that hurts you. To mistake your empathy for obligation. To feel guilty for wanting reciprocity. And here's the crucial distinction that needs to be made clearly. Your childhood explains why this pattern formed. It does not mean you are responsible for managing other adults now. Understanding this origin isn't about blame. It's about context. When you see where the pattern came from, you stop interpreting it as destiny or personality. You stop saying, "This is just who I am," and start saying, "This is what I learned to do." And anything learned can be unlearned. But before that happens, the pattern intensifies. Because the psyche doesn't let go of unfinished roles easily. It keeps returning to familiar dynamics, hoping, quietly, unconsciously, for a different ending this time. That's why you don't just meet people who need fixing. You recognize them. Something in your body leans forward. Something says, "This feels important." And you mistake that feeling for chemistry. What you're actually feeling is recognition. And that recognition sets the stage for repetition. There's a moment many people quietly recognize but rarely admit, the moment you see the red flags and feel drawn in any way. You notice the instability. The emotional unavailability. The chaos. And instead of pulling away, something inside you leans closer. Not because you enjoy suffering, but because something in you believes this time might be different. This isn't poor judgment. It's repetition. Psychology has long observed what Freud called repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to recreate unresolved emotional situations in the hope of finally changing the ending. Modern trauma research reframes this more gently: the nervous system repeats what it hasn't metabolized yet. It returns to familiar emotional landscapes, not because they're healthy, but because they're unfinished. When you're drawn to someone who needs fixing, your system isn't seeking pain. It's seeking resolution. You're not falling for them. You're falling for the chance to repair something old. There's often a quiet fantasy underneath the attraction, even if you'd never put it into words. If I can help them feel safe, I'll finally feel safe. If they choose me, the old wound will close. If this time works, it proves I was always worthy. This is why emotionally unavailable people feel like puzzles you can't stop trying to solve. They mirror the exact conditions where love once felt conditional, inconsistent, or just out of reach. Your body recognizes the terrain instantly. The tension. The waiting. The effort. The hope. Harville Hendricks's imago theory explains this clearly. We are unconsciously drawn to people who resemble our earliest caregivers, not their personalities, but their emotional availability. The nervous system doesn't seek what feels good. It seeks what feels known. And known often means unfinished. Your empathy locks onto their wounds because empathy was once how you stayed connected. Your patience activates because patience once kept you safe. Your instinct to give more emerges because giving more once felt like the only way to stay loved. This is where attraction becomes confusing. What feels like chemistry is often nervous system activation. What feels like destiny is often familiarity. What feels like depth is often emotional labor disguised as connection. And the more emotionally unavailable someone is, the more activated the pattern becomes. Because availability wouldn't trigger the story. There's also a somatic layer to this. Bessel van der Kolk's work shows that trauma lives in the body as sensation, not narrative. Your nervous system doesn't remember events, it remembers emotional states. So when you encounter someone whose presence recreates the same tension, longing, or emotional imbalance, your body responds before your mind can intervene. It feels urgent. Magnetic. Important. Not because it is, but because it matches an old imprint. And here's the hardest truth, part of you believes that if you can finally make this person love you properly, you won't have to grieve the fact that someone else didn't. Fixing becomes a bridge between the past and the present. But bridges built on unresolved pain collapse under the weight of expectation. This is why these relationships often feel intense but unstable. Why you give more than you receive. Why clarity feels just out of reach. Why you stay longer than you should, hoping effort will transform into mutuality. Your system isn't asking, is this healthy? It's asking, can this finally end differently? And until that question is answered, not intellectually, but emotionally, the pattern continues. Not because you're weak. Not because you enjoy pain. But because something inside you is still waiting for an ending it never got. There is a specific kind of person who seems to magnetically attract fixers. They are not always loud, dramatic, or obviously broken. In fact, many of them appear thoughtful, wounded in a quiet way, or even self-aware on the surface. What unites them isn't how much pain they show, it's how they relate to responsibility, intimacy, and emotional labor. Some people don't want to be healed. They want to be held in their dysfunction. From a psychological perspective, people who pull others into fixing roles often share one core feature: they externalize regulation. They struggle to soothe themselves, reflect on their behavior deeply, or tolerate emotional discomfort without leaning on someone else. Instead of processing pain internally, they unconsciously recruit another nervous system to carry it with them. This can take several forms. There are emotionally chaotic individuals, people with unresolved trauma who live in cycles of intensity and collapse. Their emotions spike quickly and fall just as fast. When they meet someone grounded, empathetic, and emotionally literate, they feel relief. Not because they want to grow, but because someone else can now stabilize what they cannot. There are subtly self-centered individuals, not always overtly narcissistic, but oriented around their inner world. Their pain is always central. Their needs are urgent. Their growth is promised but indefinitely postponed. They are drawn to fixers because fixers don't demand reciprocity, they offer patience instead. There are fragile or helpless presenting individuals, people whose identity has quietly organized around being the one who struggles. They may talk openly about their wounds, their limitations, their fear of coping alone. When a fixer enters the picture, the relationship becomes an unconscious agreement: you carry what I cannot. And there are avoidant individuals, people who fear true intimacy but still want closeness. Being with someone who focuses on fixing them allows intimacy without exposure. The fixer is busy tending, soothing, understanding, while the avoidant partner never has to fully show up, self-reflect, or risk being known. What's important to understand is this: many of these people are not consciously manipulative. Their behavior is often driven by fear, emotional immaturity, or arrested development. But unconscious does not mean harmless. People who want to be fixed often resist actual change. Growth would remove the dynamic that keeps them emotionally safe. If they healed, they would lose the person who stabilizes them without asking anything in return. So improvement is talked about, imagined, promised, but rarely embodied. This creates a painful loop. You invest more clarity, more patience, more emotional labor. They absorb it without transforming. You wait for the moment when your care finally works. That moment never arrives. Clinically, this dynamic is sustained by asymmetry. One person holds insight, empathy, and responsibility. The other holds need, confusion, and entitlement to care. Over time, this imbalance becomes the relationship itself. And here is the critical distinction that often gets blurred. Understanding someone's wounds does not make you responsible for healing them. Trauma can explain why someone struggles with accountability, regulation, or intimacy. It does not excuse patterns that drain, destabilize, or diminish another person. A healthy adult, regardless of their past, is responsible for their impact. People who want to be fixed often feel deeply threatened by boundaries. Boundaries expose the fact that care is not infinite, that love is not synonymous with labor, that connection requires mutual effort. When a fixer begins to step back, these individuals may escalate emotionally, collapse, withdraw, or accuse the fixer of abandonment. Not because the fixer has done something wrong, but because the role they depended on is disappearing. And this is where many fixers get trapped. They mistake the other person's distress for proof that they are needed. In reality, it is proof that the dynamic was never sustainable. This block matters because it removes the illusion. You are not uniquely capable of saving them. They are not secretly waiting for your help to finally heal. And your exhaustion is not evidence of love, it is evidence of imbalance. Seeing this clearly is not cruelty. It is the beginning of self-respect. Being drawn to people you need to fix doesn't just shape your relationships. It quietly reshapes you. At first, it looks like devotion. Loyalty. Depth. You tell yourself you're loving harder, caring more deeply, showing up in ways others wouldn't. But over time, something begins to feel off. You feel tired in a way that rest doesn't touch. You feel strangely invisible in relationships where you're always present. You feel valued for what you do, not for who you are. This is the hidden cost of the fixer role. When love is built around emotional labor, your nervous system never gets to rest. You're always scanning. Always listening between the lines. Always anticipating shifts in mood, energy, tone. You become the emotional regulator, the stabilizer, the one who absorbs chaos so the relationship can keep functioning. And because this role once kept you safe or connected, your body treats it as necessary, even when it's slowly draining you. Over time, love stops feeling like connection and starts feeling like responsibility. You begin confusing care with obligation. Intimacy with effort. Affection with endurance. You may notice that you struggle to receive without guilt. Compliments feel uncomfortable. Being supported feels foreign. When someone offers to meet you halfway, a part of you doesn't trust it, because your identity has been built around giving, not receiving. And slowly, subtly, your sense of self narrows. You start defining your worth by your usefulness. By how much you can hold. By how much you can tolerate. By how much pain you can metabolize without breaking. You become proud of how much you can survive, without realizing how little space there is left for joy, ease, or reciprocity. One of the most painful realizations fixer types have is this: you were never in love with who they were. You were in love with who they could be if you stayed long enough, cared deeply enough, healed them enough. And that hope becomes a trap. Because while you're loving their potential, they're often loving your effort. Your patience. Your availability. Your emotional flexibility. Not your boundaries. Not your needs. Not your full self, but the version of you that bends, adapts, and stays. This creates a devastating asymmetry. You grow emotionally attached through investment. Through sacrifice. Through depth. They remain emotionally detached because they are never required to change. You wait for the moment they'll finally choose you the way you've chosen them. The moment your care will be reciprocated. The moment the relationship will stabilize, soften, deepen. But that moment rarely comes, because the relationship itself is built on imbalance. And balance would require them to face themselves, not lean on you. The longer this goes on, the more disconnected you become from your own needs. You stop asking what you want. You stop noticing what hurts. You stop trusting your exhaustion as information. You tell yourself this is just what love costs, unaware that what you're actually paying is your vitality, your voice, and your sense of enoughness. And when the relationship finally ends, whether through collapse, betrayal, burnout, or quiet resignation, the grief is complicated. You're not just mourning them. You're mourning the future you carried alone. The emotional labor you invested without return. The version of yourself that kept believing this time would be different. This is why fixer relationships hurt so deeply when they end. Not because you lost them, but because you lost yourself while trying to save them. And yet, within that pain is a crucial truth waiting to be seen. Love that requires you to disappear is not love, it's survival repeating itself. You were never meant to earn connection through exhaustion. You were never meant to prove your worth through sacrifice. You were never meant to carry someone else's healing as the price of being loved. The cost of being the fixer is not just emotional burnout. It's the quiet belief that your presence alone is not enough. And that belief, not the people you're drawn to, is the pattern that must end. There is a quiet moment when the pattern finally becomes visible, not as a theory, not as a diagnosis, but as a lived truth. You notice how tired you are. Not just emotionally, but existentially. Tired of carrying, anticipating, stabilizing, hoping. Tired of loving in a way that feels like work you never applied for. And in that moment, something essential shifts. You realize that what you've been calling love has been labor. And what you've been calling loyalty has been self-abandonment. Breaking the fixing pattern doesn't start with choosing different people. It starts with choosing a different role for yourself. For a long time, your nervous system learned that closeness meant responsibility. That connection required effort. That love arrived only after you proved your usefulness. So of course you were drawn to people in pain. Pain gave you a job. Pain gave you purpose. Pain made you feel necessary. And being necessary felt dangerously close to being loved. The exit begins when you stop confusing intensity with intimacy. Secure connection is quieter than what you're used to. It doesn't spike your adrenaline. It doesn't activate your rescue instincts. It doesn't make you feel urgently needed. And because of that, it can feel unfamiliar, even boring at first. But boredom, in this case, is often the absence of threat. It's the absence of having to earn your place. One of the most important shifts is learning to tolerate relationships where you are not required to fix, soothe, or manage the other person's emotional state. Where someone can be upset without you rushing in to stabilize them. Where someone can struggle without you becoming responsible for the outcome. This is not indifference. This is boundaries at the level of the nervous system. From a polyvagal perspective, healing happens through co-regulation, not overregulation. You are not meant to be someone else's emotional life support. You are meant to meet in the middle, where both nervous systems can settle without one collapsing into the other. This means learning a new internal question. Instead of asking, how can I help them feel better, you begin asking, how does this dynamic feel in my body? Instead of, what do they need from me, you ask, what do I need right now? These questions may feel selfish at first. They're not. They're corrective. Another crucial step is grieving the fantasy. The fantasy that if you love someone enough, heal them enough, stay long enough, they will finally become safe. That the story will complete itself. Letting go of that fantasy hurts, because it asks you to accept a painful truth: some people will never become who you needed them to be, no matter how much you give. But in that grief, something powerful is reclaimed: choice. You begin to choose relationships where care flows both ways. Where your presence is valued, not your endurance. Where you don't have to be exceptional to be kept. Where love is not a project, but a place you can rest. The most radical part of this exit is realizing that you don't need to fix yourself either. The urge to fix others was never a flaw. It was an adaptation. It made sense once. It kept you connected when connection was fragile. You can thank that part of you, and still let it retire. You don't have to love through exhaustion. You don't have to earn what should be freely given. You don't have to stay in relationships that only work when you are smaller. You are not here to complete someone else's unfinished story. You are here to live your own, without carrying anyone on your back.